Hi, friend. Welcome to Rainy Tales, a quiet place for gentle stories told beneath the sound of rain. Now, let's begin tonight's story. The rain began softly tonight, like a whisper someone had been holding in all day. I opened the window just a little enough for the air to drift in, cool and damp, carrying that scent of wet leaves and the faint sweetness of earth. The curtain swayed against my hand. Somewhere in the distance, a car passed on the soaked street, its tires sighing through puddles, then fading again into the hushed dot inside. The room glowed with the amber light of a single lamp. The shade was tilted slightly, so the corner of my notebook caught the light just right, its pages faintly golden. A cup of jasmine tea steamed beside it. I hadn't planned to stay awake, but something about the sound of the rain made me linger. There was comfort in it, a rhythm steady enough to untangle thoughts. It had been a long week of noise, of screens and decisions, of voices I couldn't turn off. But here, with the rain pressing softly against the window, I could finally hear the quiet again. I could feel the weight of my own breathing. I traced the rim of the cup with one finger, watching tiny ripples form in the tea, as though even the smallest movement deserved to be seen. Some nights, the world asks nothing of you. No answers. No achievements. Only to listen. This felt like one of those nights. I thought of how often I had opened this same window through the years, how each season carried its own language of rain. The spring rain spoke in whispers of beginnings. Summer rain came fast and careless. Autumn rain slowed down, heavy with the scent of things ending. And winter rain. Winter rain was quiet like this, as if it understood the ache of wanting rest. The sound filled the room like a lullaby. Each drop against the glass reminded me that the world kept moving outside, even when I didn't. That was strangely comforting. Sometimes, when the mind grows tired from carrying too much, the best thing it can do is watch something else carry the weight for a while. The clouds, the wind, the falling water. I leaned back in the chair and looked around. The books on the shelf, the worn arm of the sofa, the soft gray blanket folded at the edge. Everything in this little space had seen me through years of change quietly, patiently. I wondered how many nights they had watched me like this, half awake, listening to the sky. A breeze slipped through the open crack of the window. It brushed across my face and moved through my hair, almost like a touch meant to say, "You're still here." I smiled at the thought. Maybe that was what I needed to remember. Not every night has to be fixed or productive. Some nights simply exist to remind us that we're alive, breathing, part of the same gentle rhythm as the rain. The tea had cooled. I took a slow sip anyway, tasting faint flowers and warmth. Somewhere outside, thunder murmured, far away. Not a warning, just a pulse, deep and kind. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the sound roll through me. If peace had a voice. Maybe it sounded like this, soft, patient, full of distance and nearness all at once. I picked up my pen and turned to a blank page. I didn't know what I would write, only that I wanted to. The ink met the paper like the first drop of rain meets the window. Quiet, inevitable, alive. I wrote, "Tonight, the rain feels like it knows my name." The word surprised me. I sat there, staring at the sentence, the way the letters curled slightly at the edges from the damp air. Maybe that was what this night was about. Not answers, not meaning, just listening until something gentle inside finally spoke. I closed the notebook, laid the pen beside it, and listened. The rain grew steadier, a soft percussion on rooftops and leaves. My heartbeat slowed to match it. And in that stillness, something within me loosened, something I didn't even know I had been holding. I leaned back once more, the lamp glowing like a small sun against the dark, and whispered into the quiet, "Good night." Outside, the rain answered. The room seemed to breathe with the rain. Each drop against the window pane made the air softer, the walls warmer, as if the storm outside had wrapped its arms around this small, quiet space. The scent of jasmine still lingered from the cup, faint but comforting, threading through the air like a memory that refused to fade. I drew the blanket closer over my legs, feeling the worn fabric, its edges frayed from years of use, its texture familiar as a friend's hand. It wasn't just a blanket anymore. It was a witness. It had been there through nights of laughter, and other nights when the silence felt too wide. I traced a scene with my thumb, remembering. It's strange how certain objects hold the echo of who we were. The half-open book on the table, its spine gently bent, still held the pressed petal I'd once placed inside. I couldn't even recall what flower it had been. Maybe a daisy from a walk years ago, but there it was. A small reminder that at some point, I'd wanted to keep something alive inside words. The rain deepened, steady and full. I listened as it found its rhythm, tapping softly against the sill, then streaming down in smooth, silvery lines. In that sound, I could almost hear the shape of time, how everything comes and goes, how we hold and release without noticing. When I first moved into this apartment, I thought of it as temporary, just a quiet corner until life felt more certain. But life never really offers certainty. It only gives you rooms like this, small, imperfect, full of echoes. Over the years, the walls learned my quiet routines, the way I hum without realizing, the way I stop mid-sentence when lost in thought, the way I stand by the window when it rains, as if waiting for something to return. Sometimes I wonder if the room remembers all of it, the laughter, the quiet heartbreak, the nights spent writing letters that were never sent. Maybe rooms have hearts too, made not of muscle, but of light and dust, beating softly when we closed the door behind us. I rose from the chair and walked toward the window. Outside, the world was blurred in silver and blue. Streetlights shimmered across puddles, reflections trembling with every drop. The rain softened everything, edges, sounds, memories. It made even loneliness feel gentle. I pressed my palm to the glass. It was cool, smooth, unjudging. I whispered to it, half to myself, "It's strange, isn't it, how we keep living?" My reflection wavered there, faint and ghostlike. I almost didn't recognize it, this quieter version of me. A gust of wind brushed the rain sideways, scattering it against the glass in delicate streaks. The air smelled like wet asphalt and something green. Somewhere a door shut, muffled by distance. Then came stillness again. The radiator hummed softly. The clock ticked once, and in that hush, I felt the room settle around me, as if it too exhaled. I realized I wasn't lonely, not really just present in a different way. Maybe peace isn't always the absence of noise, but the moment you stop fighting it. I turned back toward the table. The book was still there, waiting, the page folded where I had left it weeks ago. I picked it up and ran my fingers across the words, though I wasn't really reading. The story no longer mattered. It was the act of holding it, of remembering who I was when I last turned that page. The rain eased for a moment, falling in softer intervals, like pauses in a sentence. I sat back down, the blanket wrapped around my shoulders, and closed my eyes. I could hear everything: the drops, the wind, even the faint creak of the old floorboards beneath me. The room was speaking in small ways. Through scent, through sound, through stillness. It was telling me, "You've survived enough storms to know how to stay dry." I smiled, just a little. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the mouth, but finds its way into the heartbeat. The kind that comes when you realize you're okay, even if nothing has changed. Outside, the rain gathered strength again. It tapped against the window with renewed patience, as if reminding me that healing isn't a single moment. It's the slow, rhythmic work of rain smoothing stone. I reached for the notebook once more, opening it to the page from earlier. My handwriting looked softer than usual, the ink slightly blurred by moisture. Beneath the line, "Tonight, the rain feels like it knows my name," I wrote another. Maybe that's because it remembers who I used to be. I paused, letting the thoughts sink in, then set the pen down again. The words didn't need to be perfect. They only needed to be honest. The lamp flickered once, then steadied. The sound of the rain filled the silence again, wrapping the room, the heart, the night in one long, gentle breath. The rain carried my name tonight, or something that felt like it. Not in a loud way, not in a way that belongs to crowds or bright rooms, but in the softest place, where water meets glass, where breath slows after a long day. The syllables came like a memory, learning to speak again, as if the sky had been practicing in secret and finally found the courage to say hello. I leaned and listened the way you listen to someone you love on the phone sheet close. Eyes closed, one hand cupped around the sound. The window pane hummed with tiny rivers. The curtain moved in and out, a quiet tide. On the table, the tea waited, a thin thread of steam still rising as if the cup were thinking. My name is simple. I have heard it in sharp ways and hurried ways. I have heard it tossed into rooms like keys landing on a table, but I have never heard it the way rain said it grounded, foul first, as though the water already forgave me for the times I had not answered myself. The sound reached into some small doorway in the chest I had kept shut. It did not push. It only stood there with an open palm and waited. I said nothing back. For a while, it was enough to be called, to be recognized by the world outside the skin. I rested my forehead against the cool glass and felt the quiet percussion that stitched the night together. Somewhere a leaf clung and then let go. The city moved in soft distances like buses turning. A neighbor's laugh rising and dropping like a kite dot. It happened again. My name inside the weather. My name inside the drumming of eaves. My name in the far-off thunder that wasn't warning but welcome. It came without edges. It came like a coat slipped over tired shoulders. And with it, a question I had been avoiding. When did I stop answering myself with kindness? I did not go looking for a story. I did not open old drawers or the quiet box where I keep letters. I stayed with the sound instead, the way you stay with a sleeping child, not to wake it, but to guard its easy breathing. I let the syllables fill their cup and spill over. I let memory move without being chased. There was a summer porch light after midnight. There was a voice that once spoke my name like a promise, and then went quiet. The lamp haloed the room in gentle honey. I watched dust turn to tiny galaxies above the shade, rising and falling in the slow weather of the light. My name returned in a different key, lower, carried on the roll of thunder like a tide coming in. I thought, maybe the rain has learned me the way I have learned its moods over the years. Maybe it knows I will open the window a finger's width, that I will warm my hands around a cup, that I will listen when everything else becomes too much to hold. I tried it out loud just once. Softly my name offered back to the air. Not a shout, not a wish. More like placing a pebble on a windowsill and leaving it there. The sound did not echo. It simply joined the rain and belonged. I felt for a breath how little effort is needed to rejoin your own life. Maybe the distance between lost and found is only the size of a single word. The tea had cooled to comfort. I drank and tasted flowers, a reminder that sweetness doesn't need to be loud. The cup warmed the place my hands had forgotten. I remembered a note someone once left by my door, no signature, only rest well. Back then I thought it wasn't enough. Tonight it felt like everything. Perhaps I have been measuring care in the wrong unit's grand gestures, instead of repeating drops. The room smelled like rain and paper. I turned my notebook so that the first sentence faced the glow. Tonight, the rain feels like it knows my name. Beneath it I wrote, it knows how to say it without hurry. It knows I am trying. The ink made a soft sound, an insect's footstep. I paused to listen if the night approved. The night did not judge. It only kept raining. If you pause long enough, you can hear shapes within the storm. The round tap of a large drop, the quick staccato of little ones, the silk sound when water slides in sheets. Between them lives a softer music, the space that lets a word arrive whole. I realized how rarely I give myself that space. Most days I cut my sentences short to make room for other people's needs. It felt tender and strange to let mine take a full breath. Another memory rose without pushing. A childhood afternoon on a balcony, my mother bringing out orange slices while rain made lace out of the light. She said my name and the world felt held. She is gone now, but in the whisper of tonight, I could hear her mouth forming the vowels again, patient as leaves. I closed my eyes and let the sound finish. I don't think the rain was calling me to go anywhere. I think it was calling me back to the small, careful work of being here, to the chair that knows my shape, to the page that will wait no matter how long I take, to the breath that asks only to arrive and leave in peace. My name, in the rain, was a bell without urgency. It said stay. It said begin again, but softly. I set the cup down and listened for the next time it would arrive. I did not need it to be constant. I only needed to trust it would return. It did quiet as a fingertip, tracing a familiar path. I imagined writing it not on paper, but on water, allowing it to ripple and fade, not because it was unimportant, but because important things do not always need to last a matter. When sleep brushed the edges of the room, I let it. I did not chase it with plans or promises. I folded the blanket over my knees and leaned back, a person in a small boat rocking on a patient sea. Outside, the clouds kept speaking. Inside, I whispered my name once more, not to claim anything, but to thank the mouth that could still form it. The rain answered the way wise. Friends do. By staying got, it was almost midnight when I found the letter again. The rain had softened to a hush, falling like a secret being told from one window to another. I had been rearranging the small drawer beside my desk looking for nothing in particular, only moving through the quiet, and there it was, folded neatly between two old notebooks. The paper had yellowed at the edges, the ink faded slightly, but my handwriting was unmistakable. I sat down slowly, the blanket slipping from my shoulders. My fingers hesitated on the crease, unsure if they wanted to open the past or let it keep sleeping. The sound of the rain made the decision for me. It whispered, "Go on." The letter began with my name. My own name, written in the same curved script I use now, but the tone was younger, softer, more hopeful, more afraid. It was addressed to someone I never sent it to, someone who once knew me in ways I no longer let anyone know me. I read the first line aloud, and my voice trembled, not because of pain, but because of recognition. Sometimes, it said, the hardest thing is not that you left, but that I stopped knowing who I was when you did. The room went still. The lamp flickered once, and the rain filled the silence that followed. I traced the line again with my fingertip. Back then, I had thought of letters as doors. If I wrote enough, maybe one would open. Maybe one would let me walk through time and fix what had gone wrong. But this one had stayed here, folded and forgotten, like an unopened window in a house I never revisited. I kept reading. Each paragraph carried its own kind of ache, but it wasn't sharp anymore. The words were like stones in a river smoothed by time, shaped by the current of years. There were small confessions I had once been afraid to say aloud. There were apologies that had nowhere to go. But there was also love, steady and patient, written without bitterness. I smiled sadly. Maybe that was what healing really looked like, not erasing the past, but being able to hold it gently, without flinching. The letter ended mid-sentence. as if the person writing it, had run out of courage, or maybe realized that some words were not meant to be delivered. I folded it again carefully, as though closing the wings of something fragile. Outside, the rain began to fall a little harder. It drummed softly on the roof, not loud enough to drown my thoughts, but enough to keep them company. I thought of how many times I had written to people who would never read the words letters to the living, letters to the gone, letters to versions of myself that no longer existed. Maybe that's what we all do, in some way. We send messages into the night and hope the rain carries them somewhere kind. I placed the letter on the table beside the lamp. The light made the paper glow faintly, as if it held its own small sun inside. For a long while, I just watched it. The edges curled a little from the damp air. My reflection in the window looked softer now. Less lonely dot. There was no need to burn the letter or hide it again. It had waited long enough. It deserved to breathe, even just for this one night. I poured another cup of tea, the jasmine scent rising once more, delicate and forgiving. As I held it, I thought of the person I had written, to how they might be living somewhere under the same sky, maybe hearing the same rain, unaware that their names still rested quietly on this page. But I didn't wish for their return anymore. I didn't need an ending. What I needed was exactly this moment, the peace of knowing I had once loved, and that love had shaped me into someone capable of stillness. The letter had become something else. It was no longer about them. It was about me learning to say goodbye without closing the door completely. A small gust of wind pushed through the window, fluttering the paper. I reached out instinctively, pressing it down with my hand. The ink glistened faintly under the lamplight, alive again. I whispered into the quiet, "Thank you." I didn't know if I was thanking the person, the rain, or the younger version of myself who had dared to write those words. Maybe all three. For a moment, I imagined what it would be like if that letter had found its way to where it was meant to go. Would it have changed anything? Would they have read it, or folded it, or wept a little before putting it away? The thought didn't hurt anymore. It just drifted through me, like the scent of old paper and tea leaves. I took a slow sip, let the warmth fill me, and placed the letter back on the table, this time not hidden, but visible, present. It was no longer something unfinished. It had done its work. The rain eased again, softer now, as if satisfied. I leaned back, listening to its slow applause against the window. Every drop sounded like a small acceptance, a reminder that closure doesn't always come from answers. Sometimes it comes from simply letting something be found. I looked at the folded page one last time before turning off the lamp. Its outline blurred in the dim light, merging with the shadows of the room. And as the night settled around me, I thought maybe the rain wasn't speaking my name after all. Maybe it was whispering a softer truth. The peace arrives the moment we stop trying to rewrite what has already learned how to rest. The next morning came slow and silver. When I woke, the rain was still falling, thin as silk threads drawn across the air. The light that filtered through the window was soft, pale, like the inside of a seashell. I stayed in bed longer than usual, wrapped in the scent of damp linen and the faint trace of tea from last night. The world outside seemed quieter, as though it too had decided to rest. I rose only when the sound of footsteps echoed faintly from the street below, a couple passing under umbrellas, laughing quietly. Their voices were swallowed quickly by the rain, but for a brief second, I felt something like belonging. The city was alive, breathing through every droplet, every reflection trembling in a puddle. After dressing, I slipped on my worn coat and stepped outside. The air touched my skin with a chill that felt both new and familiar. My shoes met the wet cobblestones with a soft, rhythmic sound. The old street curved gently ahead, lined with houses whose windows glowed like sleepy eyes. The rain didn't bother me. It felt like walking through a memory, that had learned to forgive itself. I hadn't walked this way in months, maybe years. Every corner seemed to hold a shadow of who I used to be. There was the cafe where I once spent an entire afternoon writing poems no one would read. The bookstore that smelled of dust and time, where I had met someone who taught me that kindness can be quiet. The lamppost where I once stood waiting, heart full of hope and rainwater. Now, those moments felt like they belonged to another life, but not a lost one. Just completed. The rain blurred the distance between then and now, making it all part of the same soft picture. I slowed near the bridge at the end of the street. The river below was swollen, carrying the reflections of trees and houses, breaking them into silver ripples. I leaned against the railing, the metal cold beneath my fingers. For a while, I just watched the water move. It had the same patience as the rain, the same ability to carry what it could not keep. And suddenly, I thought of all the faces I had loved, each one like a small light reflected in that moving water. Some had stayed a while. Some had gone. All had changed me in quiet ways. I realized then that love, in its truest form, is not about keeping. It's about seeing someone clearly and wishing them peace, even if it takes them away from you. A bus passed across the bridge, its tires cutting through puddles. The scent of wet asphalt rose into the air. Somewhere behind me, a window shut, and the sound of it closing felt like punctuation. I kept walking, slower now. My reflection followed in the wet ground, blurred, shifting, made of both sky and shadow. It was strange to see myself like that, transparent, half there, half gone. Maybe that's what growing older is, learning to see yourself as part of everything else, not separate from it. At the next corner, I stopped before an old bakery. The window was fogged, but through it I could see the baker dusting sugar over a tray of pastries. Steam curled upward in soft ribbons. I went inside, the bell above the door chiming gently. The warmth hit me immediately, sweet and golden. The baker, a woman with silver hair tied back in a bun, smiled without asking anything. She handed me a small paper bag with a nod, as if she knew why I had come. I thanked her and took a seat by the window. The chair creaked softly. I broke the pastry in half. The smell of butter and cinnamon filled the air. Outside, the rain blurred the street again, but I could still make out the shapes of people, each of them moving through their own story, carrying invisible letters, unspoken goodbyes, small joys. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel separate from them. I was just another passerby under the same sky. I sipped the tea the baker brought me and smiled to myself. I thought about the letter waiting at home, about the way I had folded it back into stillness. Maybe someday I would read it again. Maybe not. It didn't matter. It had already served its purpose. It had reminded me that I could feel deeply and still survive it. The rain outside softened into mist. The sound against the window became a gentle heartbeat, steady and calm. I leaned my head against the glass and watched as the city shimmered, alive and quiet, like a breathing organism. When I finally stood to leave, the baker waved. "Stay dry," she said. Her voice carried a kindness that warmed something inside me. I nodded, stepping back into the silver light. The rain greeted me once more, gentle and familiar. On the walk home, I took the long way past the bridge again, past the narrow street where ivy climbed the walls. Everything glistened. Every puddle held a story. I thought about how many times I had tried to outrun sadness, when maybe all it ever wanted was to walk beside me for a while. By the time I reached my door, the rain had slowed to a fine drizzle. I paused before going in, watching the drops slide down the wooden frame, each one vanishing quietly into the ground. There was beauty in their ending. Inside, the air still smelled faintly of jasmine. The lamp waited, patient and kind. And there, on the table, The folded letter glowed softly in the half-light. I didn't touch it this time. I simply sat beside it, breathing, listening to the rain as it faded into the distance. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to look back. The night, the letter, the streets, they all lived within me, now, not as wounds, but as weather that had passed and left the air cleaner than before. Evening returned quietly, almost unnoticed. The rain had not stopped all day, but its rhythm had changed, no longer insistent, just steady, like breathing in the background. The city lights shimmered in puddles along the street, and the scent of wet earth drifted in through the open window. I sat once more at the little wooden table, a fresh cup of jasmine tea beside me, steam rising in soft spirals. The folded letter still lay there, untouched since morning. The paper looked content now, no longer like a thing that needed to be hidden. I didn't plan to read it again. Its purpose had already dissolved into something quieter, like tea leaves at the bottom of a cup. Outside, I could hear the faint clinking of dishes from a nearby apartment, the laughter of someone on the phone, a dog barking once, then stopping. These small sounds made the night feel lived in. It was strange how peace doesn't always come from silence. It often hides inside ordinary noise, waiting to be noticed. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup and exhaled. The heat met the cool air, fogging the glass slightly. The scent of jasmine rose again, delicate and familiar. It reminded me of all the times I'd brewed this same tea on lonely nights, hoping it would anchor me somehow. And maybe it had. Maybe that's what rituals do. They give us something to return to when everything else feels uncertain. I took a sip. It was gentle, faintly sweet, a flavor that asked for patience. As I swallowed, I felt the warmth move slowly through me, like forgiveness finding its way into forgotten corners. On the shelf, a small radio sat gathering dust. I hadn't turned it on in months. On a whim, I reached for it and twisted the old dial. The sound crackled, then cleared a soft, distant voice introducing a song. A few seconds later, slow piano chords filled the room, so faint they almost blended with the rain. The song was one I used to know, though I couldn't remember the lyrics. Only the feeling something about waiting, about the tenderness of staying, even when no one asks you to. I smiled. How many things in life are like that, staying quietly, without being noticed, until suddenly their absence hurts more than their presence ever did? The music drifted through the air, wrapping itself around the rain's rhythm. I rested my chin on my hand and watched the candle flicker on the desk. Its flame bent gently each time the wind slipped through the window. Everything was moving in its own small dance ring. Light, music, breath, and I was part of it. No longer watching from the outside. For years, I had treated peace as something to be earned, something that came only after a long list of lessons and mistakes. But tonight, it felt simpler. Peace wasn't a prize. It was a moment, this one. Right here, tea cooling slowly, radio humming softly, heart beating without hurry. I thought again about forgiveness. Not the grand kind we dramatize in books or films, but the small, quiet version that happens between breaths. The kind that says, you did your best with what you knew. I whispered those words into the empty room, and the air seemed to soften around them. The rain outside grew lighter, almost a mist now. The sky had turned a deep indigo, clouds shifting like slow rivers. Somewhere in that darkness, the moon hid behind a curtain of vapor, its light barely reaching the city. Still, the world glowed from lamps, from windows, from people sitting at their own tables, holding their own cups, maybe also trying to forgive something. I imagined them strangers scattered across this sleeping city, each of us, listening to the same rain, each carrying our own stories. It made me feel less alone. Perhaps we're all connected in ways we'll never see, by quiet evenings like this, by the act of simply enduring with gentleness. The radio song ended, replaced by silence so full it almost hummed. I turned the dial off, but the melody lingered in the room, faint and golden. I reached for the candle and watched the wax pool at its base. It reminded me of time always melting, always reshaping itself, always leaving traces of light. I thought of everything that had brought me here, the noise, the mistakes, the letters, the loneliness, the waiting. And instead of regret, I felt gratitude, because even the hardest days had been bridges, leading quietly to this moment of stillness. When I looked on, the tea had cooled again. I smiled at the familiarity of it, at how little things can teach you to be gentle. I took one last sip, set the cup down, and folded my hands together. The rain whispered something soft against the glass, so soft I couldn't catch the words. But I understood the feeling Dot was saying. You're doing fine. You can rest now, Dot, and for the first time in a long while, I believed it. The lamp glowed like a small sun. The window shimmered with silver trails. The letter on the table waited quietly, not as a wound anymore, but as a keepsake of healing. Outside, the rain kept falling steady, kind, eternal. The radio stayed silent tonight. I didn't turn it on. I didn't need to. The rain had learned its melody again, and that was enough, Dot. It was one of those nights where the air feels thick with calm, when even the smallest sound seems to echo a little longer. The soft patter of water against the glass, the rustle of a curtain brushing the sill, the slow, measured rhythm of my own breathing. Everything was simple, unhurried, alive. I sat in the kitchen this time, not the study. The room was dimly lit by the small yellow bulb above the stove, and the counter still smelled faintly of bread. I had left a few crumbs scattered beside the kettle, but I didn't bother to sweep them away. There was something strangely comforting about imperfection tonight, the reminder that life doesn't need to be tidy to be beautiful. The rain whispered through the half-open window, steady and soft, and in between those sounds came a small voice from memory, the voice of an old Song 1 that used to play from this same radio years ago. I could almost hear the first few notes, that slow hum that always filled the kitchen while dinner simmered on the stove. I smiled. I hadn't thought about that song in years. I closed my eyes and let the memory unfold. The gentle clatter of plates, the warmth of candlelight, a laugh echoing from across the table. I remembered someone humming along, not quite in tune, and me teasing them for it. I remembered how they smiled without defending themselves, as if harmony was never the point connection was. That kitchen doesn't exist anymore, at least not the way it was. The walls have been painted over, the window replaced. The laughter has gone somewhere else. But tonight, it all came back in soft fragments, carried by the rhythm of rain on the windowsill. I didn't feel sadness in it, just tenderness, the kind that reminds you that something once mattered deeply, and that was enough. I turned to look at the little vase on the table, where a single white flower leaned toward the light. Its petals had begun to curl, faintly browned at the edges, but still beautiful in its quiet persistence. I reached out and brushed one petal with my finger. "You've done well," I whispered. Outside, thunder murmured far away, so faint it felt more like a sigh than a sound. The candle flame wavered slightly. I leaned back, resting my elbows on the table, and listened again to the night dot. It occurred to me then how much of life is made of things. We can't replay exactly moments that fade as soon as we try to hold them. A laugh, a shared glance, the smell of rain on someone's coat. But maybe that's what makes them sacred. They come to remind us that we were here, that we lived, that we loved. And then they go, leaving traces for nights like this to rediscover. The old refrigerator hummed gently, joining the rain in a slow duet. I thought of how many times this little room had kept me company. When I was lonely, it held me. When I was tired, it stayed quiet. When I was happy, it reflected it back in the clinking of spoons and soft light on the walls. Maybe peace doesn't need to arrive all at once. Maybe it's built from these small domestic mercies, the hum of an appliance, the sound of boiling water, the comfort of an ordinary chair beneath you, the kind of peace that doesn't demand your attention, but waits patiently until you notice it. I poured myself another cup of tea. The steam rose like a veil between me and the rain. The scent of jasmine mingled with the faint aroma of bread and lemon soap. It all felt like home. Not the home made of walls, but the one built quietly inside you when you finally stop running. I took a sip and thought about the voice that used to hum in this kitchen, about the song that still lived in the walls somehow. Maybe we never lose the people who truly touched us. Maybe their kindness becomes part of the air itself, breathing with us long after they've gone. The rain softened, turning almost transparent. Each drop on the window looked like a small spark of light before it slipped away. I set my cup down and closed my eyes, listening not for words, not for meaning, just for the music of this quiet hour. If peace had a sound, I thought it would be this. Rain in the dark, the gentle hum of old things still working, the ghost of a melody that doesn't need to be finished. A breeze moved through the window, carrying the cool scent of night. I let it touch my face. Somewhere outside, a train rumbled faintly, the sound dissolving into distance. The world was moving, but I didn't need to follow. I was right where I belonged. The flower on the table bent slightly toward me, and I smiled, feeling something like gratitude rise in my chest. Not loud or dramatic, just a quiet warmth spreading through my ribs. Gratitude for the rain, for the silence, for the ghosts that hum and the heart that still listens. I whispered softly to the room, "I'm okay." The rain seemed to answer, not in words, but in rhythm, in the slow tap against the glass that said, "Yes, I know that," and for a while, the night and I simply breathed together, each exhale blending with the other, until even the sound of my heartbeat began to feel like part of the rain. The rain stopped sometime after midnight, leaving the world glazed with silver silence. I didn't notice it at first. I had fallen into that kind of half-dreaming state, where thoughts move slowly, where the present stretches out like an open field. When I finally realized, the absence of the rain felt almost startling, like the sudden quiet that follows a heartbeat. I got up from the kitchen chair and walked through the dim apartment. The wooden floor creaked softly under my bare feet. Without the sound of water, every small noise seemed amplified. The sigh of the kettle cooling, the whisper of the curtain swaying in leftover wind, even the faint thrum of the city beyond the window. I turned off the stove light, letting the room dim to the soft amber glow of the lamp in the living room. It painted the walls in warm color, gentle as morning sun through honey. The folded letter still rested on the table, exactly where I had left it. But beside it now sat the flower from the kitchen, its stem tucked into an empty glass. Its presence felt natural, like a companion taking a seat without asking. I stood by the window. The street outside shimmered faintly from the leftover rain, every puddle a tiny mirror reflecting the faint gold of the street lamp. The air smelled of wet soil, iron, and something sweet like the scent that lingers after a candle is blown out. That was when I noticed the porch light across the street. It had been dark for months ever since the family living there moved away. But tonight, it glowed again, soft and steady, a single circle of gold against the blue-black night. I stared at it for a long time, feeling a strange warmth in my chest. The light reminded me of something I hadn't thought about in years. When I was a child, my mother used to keep the porch light on whenever my father worked late. She said it wasn't for him to see, but for him to be seen, a quiet way of saying, "You still have a place to come home to." Back then, I never understood how much that small gesture meant. Now, Standing at this window as an adult, the meaning returned like a tide. That porch light across the street, it didn't belong to me, and yet it felt like it did. It glowed as if the world itself was telling me, "You've been wandering long enough. You can come home now." I pressed my palm gently to the cool glass. For a moment, I imagined that someone had lit that lamp just for me, to guide me back from the long, quiet storm inside my own heart. And maybe, in a way, they had. Maybe the light wasn't real. It didn't have to be. Maybe it was a reflection of something awakening within me, something that had been waiting all this time to be turned back on. Behind me, the candle flame flickered lower, melting into itself. I sat down on the sofa and pulled the blanket around my shoulders. The city felt still. The air hummed softly, as if listening. I thought of all the nights I had spent searching for meaning, for closure, for understanding. But maybe the truth was simpler. We don't always need answers. Sometimes all we need is a small, quiet sign that reminds us we're allowed to begin again. That light across the street, it wasn't bright or grand. It didn't chase away the darkness. It just stayed. It didn't need to do anything else. I watched it for a long while, the way you watch something sacred without wanting to disturb it. And as I sat there, I realized that peace doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it slips in quietly when you stop demanding to be fixed. It lives in the warm hum of a porch light, in the whisper of rain that's already fallen, in the simple act of noticing what's still beautiful. A small smile found its way to my lips. The kind that doesn't need to be seen. The kind that grows slowly, like dawn inside the chest. I whispered softly into the stillness. "I'm home." No one answered, but I didn't need them to. The light across the street pulsed once perhaps from the wind, perhaps not, and then steadied again. I leaned back into the sofa, feeling the last bit of tension leave my body. The night didn't need to be perfect. It only needed to be real. The quiet around me was full, not empty, not lonely, just full. Of breath, of presence, of every version of myself I'd ever been, sitting here together, safe under the same roof. When I closed my eyes, I could still see the porch light through the dark, glowing softly like a promise kept. Maybe peace isn't something we find. Maybe it's something that finds us when we finally stop running and turn the light back on. Outside, the sky began to clear. Somewhere beyond the clouds, the stars were waiting, patient and unseen. And inside this small, quiet room, the lamp flickered once, then burned steady, mirroring the light across the street. Two beacons in the hush after rain. The night had grown softer by the time I realized I'd been sitting there for hours. Half awake, watching the porch light across the street. It glowed like a patient friend, neither calling nor fading, just existing in quiet understanding. I didn't know who lived there now, but it didn't matter. The light itself had become a kind of language dot at some point. I picked up the old notebook again, the one with the blurred ink and the half-finished sentences. My hands hesitated before opening it, as if I were about to step into a room I hadn't entered in years. But curiosity is gentle at night, and I followed it. The first page carried a fragment I'd written long ago. There are words I keep rehearsing but never say, because silence feels safer than being misunderstood. I smiled, faintly. I remembered writing that late one winter night, rain against the same window, though the heart inside me then was heavier. Back then, I'd mistaken silence for peace, when really it was just fear wearing quiet clothes. Now, the silence around me felt different. It wasn't a cage anymore, it was space. Room for air, room for breath. I turned to a blank page, smoothing the paper flat. The lamplight glowed over it, soft as sunrise. For a while, I just stared, listening to the faint drip of water from the gutters outside. I could feel the question forming not as words, but as a kind of pulse. A need to speak, even if no one was listening. So I began to write. Not a letter this time, not even a confession, just a conversation that never was. Hello, I wrote. I think I've been trying to talk to you for years, but I kept mistaking the rain for your voice. The pen moved slowly, effortlessly. I used to think healing would mean forgetting you, the words continued. But maybe it means remembering you differently, not as loss, but as something that taught me how to stay. I paused, my throat tightening slightly. The sound of my own breath filled the space between sentences. I've imagined this talk 100 times, I wrote. Sometimes we argue. Sometimes we cry. But tonight, I just want to thank you for what hurt. And for what didn't. You were a chapter, and now I think I'm learning how to close the book without burning it. A single tear slipped down before I could stop it. It landed on the page, blooming softly into the ink. I didn't wipe it away. It felt right that the page should hold something real. Outside, a car passed slowly down the wet street, its headlights sweeping gold across the room for just a second before disappearing. When the light faded, I felt lighter too. I wrote one more line. I forgive you, even if you never ask me to. I forgive myself, even if I don't know how. And then, below it, that's enough for tonight. I closed the notebook, resting my hand on its cover. My pulse had slowed. The rain had truly stopped now, but its rhythm still lived inside the air, as if the world were breathing beside me. There's a kind of quiet that follows every conversation left unspoken. It doesn't ache anymore. It hums low and steady, like the space after a final note. That's what I felt then. Not loneliness, not sadness, just completion. I looked once more toward the window. The porch light across the street was still burning, steady and golden. It no longer felt like an invitation. It felt like a mirror. I could almost imagine it glowing inside me too, somewhere deep where old hurts had begun to soften. When I stood up, my reflection in the glass surprised me. There was no shadow of longing in it, no weight of old memories, just a person quietly standing, alive in the afterglow of rain. A person who had stopped waiting for anyone to come back. I walked to the kitchen and poured the last of the tea. It was cool now, but sweet in its calm. I raised the cup slightly, as though in a toast to the night, to the letter, to every conversation that never needed to be finished. Thank you, I whispered to no one in particular, for staying as long as you did. The air in the room felt warmer then, not because of the lamp or the tea, but because something inside had shifted a small opening where the storm had once been. Peace doesn't always arrive as laughter or clarity. Sometimes it comes as a single breath that doesn't hurt anymore. The porch light flickered once, then steadied again. I sat back down, wrapped the blanket around me, and let the silence settle. The notebook, the cup, the lamp all seemed to glow with quiet approval. And in that moment, I realized something simple. I hadn't been talking to someone else at all. The conversation I'd been trying to have all these years was with myself. I closed my eyes. The night exhaled with me, and in that gentle exchange, everything that once needed to be said had finally found its way home that morning, returned without fanfare. It came wrapped in mist, pale and cool, slipping gently between the curtains like a secret. The world outside still held the hush of night. Even the birds seemed hesitant to disturb it. The rain had stopped completely now, but its scent lingered everywhere on the wooden floor, in the folds of the blanket, in the air itself. It was the smell of renewal, faint and clean. I rose slowly, my body moving in quiet agreement with the calm. The first thing I noticed was the porch light across the street. It was still glowing, softer now in the daylight, like a candle almost ready to rest. For a moment, I stood by the window, watching how its reflection merged with the morning fog, until I could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. There was something poetic about that, the way things blur when they're ready to let go. I brewed tea again, more out of habit than need. The kettle hissed, the steam curled, and I found myself smiling at how familiar it all felt. Not as a routine born of loneliness, but as a rhythm of living. Every movement a pouring, a stirring, a slow inhale felt like part of a prayer. When I sat back down at the table, I noticed the notebook still resting where I had left it. Closed, but somehow alive. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Its presence was enough. It held the weight of everything I'd said, and the relief of everything I no longer had to. Outside, the sky was still heavy with clouds, but there was light behind them, soft, diffused, determined. It reminded me that the sun doesn't need to be seen to be felt. I wrapped my hands around the cup and took a sip. The warmth was immediate, spreading through me like a quiet tide. My reflection in the tea shimmered for a second before breaking apart in tiny ripples. And in that small, fleeting image, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Ease. The kind that doesn't ask for explanation. The street below began to stir. A man unlocking his bicycle. A child tugging at her raincoat. A woman sweeping water from her doorstep. Ordinary moments, tender in their simplicity. I watched them as if seeing the world for the first time. The way people moved through their lives, unaware of how beautiful the smallest things looked when framed by quiet dot the wind picked up, carrying the faint clinking of wind chimes from somewhere unseen. I closed my eyes and listened. Each sound seemed deliberate, like the earth was still composing music from last night's storm. When I opened my eyes, the porch light across the street flickered once and finally turned off. I expected to feel sad at its absence, but I didn't. It had done its work. It had stayed long enough for me to find my way back to myself. There was a moment small, almost invisible, when I realized how deeply still I felt. No urgency, no waiting, just breath, just being. The kind of quiet that lives not outside, but inside. The kind that stays. I looked down at my hands, tracing the faint lines of skin that had aged with time and weather and love. There was something sacred in their ordinariness. How they had held cups and pens, written letters, turned pages, reached out and let go. They had built a life out of moments like this, unremarkable yet infinite. I leaned back in my chair, eyes half closed, listening to the city wake. The rhythm outside blended with the one inside my chest until they were the same. For a heartbeat, it felt like everything, the air, the light, the room was breathing with me. That's when I thought of something simple yet certain. Peace doesn't arrive when life is perfect. It comes when we stop needing it to be. When we stop measuring ourselves by what we've lost and begin to see the beauty of what remains. The old letter still rested nearby, folded neatly. I reached out and placed my hand on it, not to open it, but to acknowledge it. The paper was cool to the touch. I whispered, "Thank you for waiting." Outside, a soft breeze passed, lifting the corner of the curtain, letting the light fall gently across the table. The letter glowed faintly, then settled back into stillness. I took another sip of tea, slower this time. The taste had deepened a little stronger, a little less floral. Maybe that's how peace tastes too, once you stop rushing it. The world beyond the window was already drying. The puddles had begun to fade, the reflections breaking apart as the sun tried shyly to return. And yet, even as the rain disappeared, it felt like it had left something, behind something invisible but lasting. The space inside me that once felt hollow now felt wide, open, ready. I thought of all the things that had brought me here, the sleepless nights, the long silences, the sound of rain calling my name and felt a quiet gratitude for every one of them. Maybe peace doesn't need to be loud. Maybe it arrives like this: a porch light turning off, a cup cooling on the table, a morning that simply continues. I stood, stretched, and whispered to the room. I'm still here. The walls, the window, the air, they all seemed to nod back. And somewhere deep within, the sky opened a little wider. That afternoon, the sky cleared enough for light to return in soft golden ribbons. It slipped between the clouds, warming the rooftops and catching in the puddles that still lingered along the street. I opened the window wider this time, and the air that drifted in was gentle, washed clean by the storm. The city had the hush of something renewed quiet, but not empty. The rain had said its part, and now the silence that followed felt like the echo of a promise kept. I sat by the window again, cup in hand, the same blanket draped loosely across my shoulders. The light caught the dust in the air, making it shimmer like tiny particles of time. It felt strange and comforting to realize how easily beauty hides in ordinary things. There's a certain peace that comes only after rain, not before it, not during it after. It's as if the world, exhausted from crime, has finally exhaled. The streets gleam softly, the trees stand taller, and even the wind seems kinder. I think that's what the rain had been trying to teach me all along. Not how to endure, but how to soften. I remembered the words that had echoed through my head last night, when the rain had called my name. Stay. At the time, I hadn't known what that meant. Stay where? Stay for what? But now, as sunlight warmed my hands, I began to understand. The rain wasn't asking me to stay in a place or a memory. It was asking me to stay with myself, to stop running from the quiet, from the ache, from the stillness that follows lost dot. So I stayed. I stayed with the sound of leaves rustling in the wet breeze. I stayed with the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I stayed with my heartbeat, patient and steady, no longer racing towards some imagined future. The world outside kept moving, but for once, I didn't need to. I thought of all the times I had tried to fill silence with music, with words, with noise that made me feel less alone. And yet, here I was, sitting inside silence, and it didn't frighten me anymore. It was tender now, spacious, like the pause between waves. A small bird landed on the balcony railing, shaking droplets from its wings. Its feathers caught the light brown, silver, a touch of blue. It tilted its head, looked around, and began to sing. Just one clear, simple note. Then another. The sound was fragile and pure, cutting through the soft air like the smallest act of faith. I smiled. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed birdsong until that moment. For weeks, maybe months, my world had been made of quiet rain and unanswered thoughts. But this was life returning, one note at a time. The bird stayed for a while, then flew off toward the light, leaving only the echo of its song behind. And I found myself whispering into the air, "Thank you." I didn't know who or what I was thanking. The rain, the morning, the voice that had told me to stay. Maybe all of them. Maybe none. Gratitude doesn't always need a direction. Sometimes it just needs to be spoken. The sun slipped further across the window pane, and shadows began to form on the floor soft, elongated, shifting like breath. I reached out to touch one, and it felt almost alive, like water you could hold for a moment before it changed shape again. Not everything around me had become a kind of conversation. The world wasn't loud, but it wasn't silent either. It was speaking in gestures, the sway of curtains, the glint of light, the gentle creak of wood, expanding in warmth. And if you listened closely, you could almost hear it say, "You're allowed to rest. You don't have to keep proving you deserve this peace." I thought about how often I'd treated peace as something to earn, as if calm was a reward instead of a right. How strange that it took a storm to remind me that stillness is part of living too. A breeze moved through the room, lifting a page of the notebook still lying open on the table. It flipped once, twice, then settled on a blank sheet. I stared at it for a while, then smiled. The rain had stopped. The story wasn't finished, but for once, I didn't feel the need to fill the page. Maybe that's what healing looks like. Not writing the next line, but knowing you could, if you wanted to. The porch light across the street remained dark now, but I didn't miss it. I carried its glow inside me, the quiet assurance that I could find my way back, even in the dark. The air in the room was still cool, still smelling faintly of wet pavement and jasmine. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the sunlight rest across my face. It felt like a hand, familiar and kind, and in that golden quiet, I heard it again, not from outside this time, but from somewhere deep within. The same voice, soft and certain, saying only one word, "Stay, Dot." So I did. I stayed with the light. I stayed with the quiet. I stayed with myself, Dot, and for the first time in a very long time. That was enough, Dot. By evening, the light had turned amber again, sliding slowly down the walls as if it too were tired. The air outside was calm, the streets drying beneath the last blush of sun. I didn't bother turning on the radio or any music. The silence had become a friend I didn't want to interrupt. The room felt different now, lighter somehow, as though something invisible had been lifted from the air. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was the weather. Or maybe it was just the slow work of time, quiet and patient, smoothing edges I hadn't even known were sharp. I made another cup of tea, but this time not jasmine. Tonight I chose chamomile, soft and earthy, the kind that tastes like warmth when you don't want to think too much. As the steam rose, I thought about how the simple act of making tea had accompanied nearly every part of this story, from the storm's beginning to the still, golden calm. There was something comforting in that repetition. It reminded me that peace doesn't always arrive as something new. Sometimes it's the familiar things that finally feel safe again. I sat near the window, cross-legged, the cup resting between my palms. Outside, the light faded, and the first stars began to show through the thin veil of clouds. I watched them appear one by one, small and steady, as if the sky were remembering itself after a long sleep. There was no longing tonight, no ache, just quiet, Dot, the kind of quiet that answers without words. Dot, it wasn't that. I had stopped missing the things I'd lost. It's that the missing no longer hurt. The memories were still there, but they had learned how to breathe, how to live alongside the present without demanding attention. I thought about the version of myself who had once written that old letter, the one afraid of endings, afraid of silence. I wished I could reach back in time and tell them that endings aren't the same as disappearances, that sometimes what leaves us is also what frees us. The rain had taught me that, through its coming and going, its noise and its hush, it had taught me that peace wasn't a place or a moment. It was a way of listening. Listening to what the world says when you stop trying to control it. Listening to what your heart whispers when it's no longer drowned out by wanting Dot the tea, cooled as I sat there, lost in thought. A soft breeze slipped through the open window, carrying with it the faint smell of the sea, though the ocean was miles away. It was enough to make me smile. I placed the cup on the windowsill and let my hands rest in my lap. The sound of evening had changed now, the distant hum of cars, the gentle clicking of someone's footsteps on the wet pavement, a dog barking once and then stopping. Ordinary sounds, yet each one felt like a thread tying me quietly to the world. I'd always been afraid of silence because I thought it meant being alone. But tonight, I realized silence is never empty. It's full of small voices, the hum of light, the breath of wind, the echo of your own heartbeat. It's full of life that doesn't need to announce itself. The clock ticked softly on the wall. its rhythm matching the calm rise and fall of my breathing. For a moment, everything aligned. The sound, the air, the light. And in that perfect symmetry, I felt something shift inside. Not a revelation, just an acceptance, Doc. It was enough to exist here. Now got no letters waiting to be written. No words begging to be said. No ghosts left unspoken. Only this, a quiet kind of answer. I leaned forward and blew gently on the tea, watching the ripples spread across the surface. In the reflection, I saw the lamplight tremble, then steady. I whispered softly to it, as though to an old friend, "Thank you for staying." It wasn't meant for the lamp, or the rain, or the tea. It was for everything, for the storm, for the silence that followed, for the ache that had softened into something gentler. I realized then that peace isn't something that arrives at the end of a story. It's what you find when you stop needing the story to end at all. The sky deepened to a deeper shade of blue. I turned off the lamp and let the room fade into dusk. The last thing I saw before darkness filled the corners was the reflection of the stars on the window small, trembling infinite. I closed my eyes and listened one last time. The world breathed. So did I, Doc, and in the quiet that followed, I could almost hear the words forming somewhere deep within me. Not as sound, but as understanding. "You're allowed to rest now, Doc." So I did. Night fell again, soft as a whisper. The rain hadn't returned, but its memory lingered in the coolness of the air, in the scent of earth rising faintly from the streets below. The city glowed under a pale moon-silver rooftops, quiet windows, the kind of hush that makes you feel the world is holding its breath. I sat by the same window, the same lamp burning low beside me, and realized how much had changed without anything changing at all. The notebook still lay open. The teacup still waited. The blanket still held the faint warmth of my shoulders. And yet, the weight that once filled this room was gone. The air felt lighter now, as if it had been forgiven. Peace had found me, not suddenly, but gently, like the slow return of a tide. It came in small ways. In the way my body no longer tensed at silence. In the way my thoughts drifted without urgency. In the way my heart, once crowded with ghosts, now beat with quiet steadiness, as if it had finally remembered its own rhythm. For so long, I had believed peace was something I needed to chase, that it lived in distant places, in other people, in unspoken answers, in the future I hadn't yet reached. But now I saw it clearly. Peace was never somewhere else. It had been here all along, waiting for me to stop running long enough to notice. The sound of the clock filled the stillness, steady and calm. Tick, pause, tick. Each second felt like a soft reminder that time itself could be kind, if you let it. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. Behind my eyelids, I could see flashes of everything that had brought me here. The first raindrop against the glass, the letter found in the drawer, the voice that had spoken my name through the storm. All of it had been leading to this, not an ending, but an understanding. Peace isn't the absence of storms, I thought. It's learning how to sit with the rain and trust that it won't last forever. When I opened my eyes again, the moon had shifted, spilling silver light across the floorboards. I watched it crawl slowly toward the wall, illuminating the edges of books, the soft curve of the teacup, the shadow of my own hand. Everything glowed as if blessed by quietness. And then I heard it so faint, I almost missed it, the rustle of the wind through the trees outside. It carried with it the softest echo, a voice not quite human, but deeply familiar. It wasn't calling my name anymore. It was simply saying, "Rest." Something inside me loosened completely. I exhaled a long, easy breath and let my shoulders drop. The tightness I hadn't realized I was holding melted away. For a moment, I felt as if the rain itself had returned not outside, but within me, washing everything clean from the inside out. There were no grand revelations, no sudden clarity. only quiet. Only the sense that every piece of me was finally sitting in the same room. Reading together after years of being scattered, I thought about how fragile we are, how we spend our lives collecting moments, trying to hold on to them, when maybe the beauty was never in holding, but in being touched at all. Maybe peace isn't about what stays. Maybe it's about knowing that what leaves also leaves light behind. The lamp flickered gently, its flame swaying in agreement. I smiled without meaning to. I stood and walked toward the window. The world outside looked washed, renewed. Somewhere far away, a church bell rang soft, distant, kind. The sound drifted through the air like a prayer too small for words. For the first time, I didn't wish the rain would return. I didn't need it to. It had already given me everything it came to give God peace. It found me again, not as thunder or silence, not as lesson or loss, but as something simple and human. A quiet coat draped across tired shoulders, fitting perfectly, warming everything it touched. I whispered softly, "You can stay." And for a heartbeat, it felt like the night whispered back, "I already am." The moonlight filled the room. The shadows folded into coral. The air shimmered faintly, alive with something invisible but certain. And there, beneath it all, I heard my own voice, not trembling, not lost say what I had been waiting to hear for years. I'm at peace, not a wish, not a hope, a truth. Outside, the wind sighed once more, gentle and full. The world exhaled with me. The night deepened into that quiet hour when even the city seems to rest. Lights flickered behind curtains, one by one fading until only the soft glow of street lamps remained. I sat at the desk again, the air around me still, the kind of stillness that feels sacred, like the pause before a prayer, or the breath between heartbeats. The letter was still there. It had traveled with me through all these nights, through every storm in silence, patient as an old friend. Its edges were softer now, its paper faintly curled from the damp air. I reached for it slowly, feeling the faint texture beneath my fingertips, the grooves of ink, the pulse of memory. For a long time, I simply looked at it. I didn't feel sorrow anymore, or even nostalgia, just gratitude. Gratitude that the version of me who once wrote this had the courage to put pain into words instead of letting it rot quietly inside. The lamp beside me glowed low, a small, tired flame that seemed to understand. I unfolded the letter one last time, the paper sighing softly as it opened. The handwriting felt almost foreign, now gentler, more fragile. The words no longer belonged to who I was. They belonged to who I had been. I forgive you, it ended, even if you never asked me to. I read the sentence again and again until the words no longer carried meaning, but became sound-soft, rhythmic, like the echo of rain against the glass. I smiled. Somewhere between then and now, the forgiveness had already happened. There was no one left to send the letter to. No address, no waiting, no need. It had already reached the only place it was ever meant to go here, to this moment, to the quiet within me that had learned to stay. I folded the letter carefully, tracing each crease with my thumb. This time, it didn't feel like closing a door. It felt like placing something precious back into the world with care. Not as an act of letting go, but as an act of keeping it safely without the ink. The candle beside the window had burned down nearly to the end. I picked up the letter, held it above the small flame for a moment, not to destroy it, but to let the light pass through the paper. The glow illuminated the ink, each word glowing briefly before fading again. Then I blew out the candle. The smoke curled upward, carrying the faint scent of wax and time dot in the half-darkness. I slipped the letter back into the drawer where I had found it days ago. The same drawer, but a different meaning now. It was no longer a hiding place. It was a resting place. I sat there, hands folded in my lap, and listened. Even without the rain, the world still had its rhythm, the hum of distant traffic, the sigh of wind against the walls, the slow breathing of the night. Everything was moving, even in stillness. And I realized that peace isn't the absence of motion. It's the trust that movement can be gentle. That change doesn't have to break you. It can unfold quietly, like a petal turning toward light. I leaned back, letting the chair creak beneath me, and thought of everything that had brought me here. The storm, the silence, the light that had returned, the voice that had called my name through the rain, the small signs that had taught me how to listen. None of it felt heavy anymore. It felt sacred. Every moment, every mistake, every pause. Sacred because they had built the person sitting here now, someone who finally understood that being found by peace isn't about arrival. It's about recognition. I took a deep breath. The air tasted of cooling wax and open windows. I closed my eyes and saw it all. The raindrops gliding down glass, the tea steaming softly, the faint light across the street. The words stay whispered like a lullaby through the wind. All the fragments that once felt scattered now rested together inside me, whole. I whispered softly into the dark, "Thank you for finding me." Outside, the moon slipped behind a slow-moving cloud. Shadows melted into one another, leaving the room bathed in a silver-gray glow. I placed my hand on the drawer one last time, pressing lightly over where the letter now rested. I could almost feel its quiet heartbeat beneath the wood. Not as grief, but as memory made gentle dot then, I let my hand fall away. The blanket slid down my shoulders, pulling softly at my feet. I didn't pick it up. The room was warm enough now. The silence, kind enough dot in the window's reflection. I caught a glimpse of myself, not lonely, not waiting, just still. And in that stillness, I found a kind of beauty that didn't need witnesses dot. It was enough to sit here, breathing in a room that remembered the rain, but no longer needed it. I whispered, more to myself than anyone else, "You can rest now." And the night, gentle as breath, seemed to answer back, "I already am." The sky was pale when I woke, the kind of dawn that doesn't rush its way into the world. Soft light slipped through the window, brushing against the edge of the curtain, painting quiet lines of gold across the floor. Outside, the streets were still damp, their reflections faint and calm. The storm was truly gone now, but its spirit lingered in the freshness of the air, in the coolness that clung to the glass, in the peace that had settled deep inside the bones of the day. I didn't move at first. I simply lay there, listening. The world was beginning again in the softest way. Somewhere a bird sang. A car door shut. The hum of a kettle from a neighboring apartment drifted faintly through the walls. The kind of sounds that remind you life continues, quietly, beautifully, without asking your permission. When I finally rose, the blanket slid from my shoulders. The air kissed my skin with that tender chill only morning can give. I walked to the window, opened it wide, and let the world in. The scent of wet stone and distant flowers met me. A soft breeze carried the faint laughter of a child from down the street. The light touched everything gently, the buildings, the puddles, the leaves, and even the empty chair beside the table. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the urge to fill that empty space with anything. It was perfect as it was. On the table, my cup waited. A few tea leaves clung to the bottom, dried into small constellations. The notebook lay closed beside it, a pen resting diagonally across the cover, as if it too had fallen asleep after a long night of remembering. I smiled and sat down. There was nothing left to write now. No more letters to unfold, no names left to whisper, no questions that needed answers. The story, it seemed, had already told itself. What remained was simply the quiet after the telling, the moment where the words settle and the heart exhales. I ran my fingers along the wooden surface of the table. It was warm from the sun. Dust sparkled faintly in the beam of light, moving lazily through the air like tiny pieces of time. Maybe peace isn't something that arrives, it's something that awakens when you stop chasing it. Something that's been waiting beneath every storm, every silence, every breath. I leaned back and closed my eyes. Behind them, I could still hear the rain, not as a memory, but as rhythm, the slow, patient music that had carried me here. Each drop had spoken something I hadn't been ready to hear then, that it's okay to be still, to soften, to begin again. I thought about how strange it is that we spend so much of our lives searching for meaning, when maybe meaning lives quietly in the small things. The steam of morning tea, the sound of a window opening, the warmth of sunlight on the skin. I opened my eyes again. The city was brighter now. A cat walked along the edge of a fence. 2 pigeons cooed softly under the eaves. The porch light across the street was still off, its purpose fulfilled, but I could still see its reflection in my mind, steady, golden kind. Some lights don't need to shine forever to change you. Sometimes they stay lit long enough for you to remember how to keep your own flame alive. I reached for the cup, lifted it, and held it near the window. The light passed through the thin porcelain, turning the tea-stained glass into amber. For a moment, the whole world seemed to glow inside it. A thought came, quiet and sure. I don't need to be found anymore. I am here. I have been here all along. The words weren't written or spoken. They simply existed, like the light itself. Outside, the sky brightened further, soft clouds drifting apart to make room for the sun. I watched the first rays break through, golden and full, touching everything with a warmth that felt like forgiveness. The world looked new again, but not because it had changed, because I had. I stayed there a while longer, just breathing, letting the light move across my face, feeling the calm settle deep in the spaces where once there had been restlessness. The kind of calm that doesn't need to last forever to be real, Doc. And when I finally whispered, "Thank you," to no one and everything, the wind moved gently through the open window, curling around the room before slipping back into the sky. The letter, the rain, the silence, all of it had become part of this morning. I folded my hands on the table, leaned forward, and smiled at the simplest truth of all. Peace had found me not through noise or longing, but through stillness, through the act of staying, through the sound of my own name spoken softly by rain. Outside, a single drop of water, late to fall, slid down the window pane, its slow descent catching the light as it went, until it vanished at the edge, leaving behind only a trace of shimmer. That was how the story ended, not with goodbye, but with quiet, not with loss, but with the sound of the world, gentle and alive, whispering me to sleep. I rested my head on folded arms beside the open window, and let the morning hold me. The rain, though gone, was still singing somewhere inside. And peace, at last, stayed.